Over the years, Pokemon has come out with a lot of interesting, cool looking, and sometimes even iconic fictional creatures. And even today, Pokemon is still coming out with some interesting, cool looking, and possibly iconic fictional creatures. But there's still no denying, there are some Pokemon that are, to a lot of people, uninteresting, lazily designed, and overall, just flat out boring. So for fun, I've decided to make a list of what I think are the 10 boringest Pokemon so far, but deciding on which Pokemon are boring can differ from person to person. I figured it'd be best to get the opinion of a friend and fellow Pokemon YouTuber, that being HoopsandHipHop.
What's up everybody, I'm HoopsandHipHop. So like Alex said, we're going to be going over what we think are the 10 most boring Pokemon, but obviously calling a Pokemon boring is very subjective. So how we're ranking these Pokemon is based on how boring a Pokemon is overall, and not just design. For example, Ditto on its own does have a pretty bland design, just being a pink blob with a face, but its ability to transform into any Pokemon makes it a much more interesting and unique Pokemon. We'll also be taking into account any evolutions each Pokemon might have, since a Pokemon might start out intentionally boring, but becomes more interesting thanks to what it eventually becomes.
We're also not including any Gen 7 Pokemon, or Pokemon with an Alolan form, because even though from their appearance they might look boring, there might be something more to it that we don't already know, and the same goes for Alolan form Pokemon. So before we get into the list, let's go over some Pokemon we considered putting on the list, but just missed out.
The Caterpie line itself is pretty boring, but Butterfree apparently having psychic powers saves it slightly. Ekans is just a snake, but at least it's purple. Oddish at least has a branch evolution, and Psyduck may look boring, but it has the whole psychic vibe about it and even evolves into a much more interesting Pokemon. Execute, well, you know. Quillfish was going to be on the list, but is at least based on a more interesting fish than a regular one and also has the additional poison typing. And Zigzagoon is pretty boring, but when it evolves it gets a pretty cool avatar symbol on its head.
Barboach starts off boring, but I guess it has a more interesting evolution to back it up. Bidoof is probably the simplest designed regional rodent, but Bibarel at least has a unique type combination. Cherubi on its own isn't that interesting for a Pokemon based on a cherry, but it does have an evolution with a pretty unique concept. Chingling is just a bell, but it's a very nicely designed bell that evolves into a wind chime. Finneon and Lumineon are pretty basic fish, but like Chingling are at least very nicely designed. Pidove might be the boringest regional bird, but Unpheasant's notable gender differences save it. And finally, Ducklet and Swanna might look boring, especially down to their names, but just barely miss the list because Ducklet is at least blue, Swanna has some features that look nice, and the Pokemon on the actual list just so happen to be even more boring in our opinion. So, let's finally get into our list of the top 10 most boring Pokemon.
Number 10 is Basculin. Fish are probably the most common Pokemon, and we're bound to get them every generation, which makes sense since there are so many different types of real-life fish. Now for the most part, fish Pokemon have something going on for them. They either start out bland and become something awesome, or they have some sort of unique feature to them. Basculin is easily one of the least interesting fish Pokemon introduced. Ever. It looks like it should evolve, but doesn't, and its design isn't that appealing either. The only thing keeping Basculin at the bottom of this list is the red and blue forms it has. But even then, not only are these forms extremely bare-boned, but Basculin was actually one of, if not the last Gen 5 Pokemon to get into Black and White, since it was created late in development when the developers realized they needed to fill up the Pokédex. So basically, Basculin was created last minute, and its forms were supposed to make up for the small amount of fish in the region. So in a way, Basculin is technically the laziest designed Pokemon, but for those reasons, it takes the bottom spot on our list.
Number 9. Luvdisc. What's a fish Pokemon that's even more boring than Basculin? The one that is literally a pink heart, that doesn't have any special form or evolution to make it less boring. Although Game Freak had the perfect opportunity in a certain generation, but for whatever reason decided not to take it. Let's take a look at the fish that Luvdisc is based on, being the discus fish. Now, if Luvdisc had some sort of nice looking pattern on it, like any of these fish, it might have been saved from the list. But the fact that Luvdisc is even more boring design wise than what it's actually based on, and pretty much that its only useful purpose is to farm heart scales, easily makes it one of the most boring, if not the most boring of all the fish Pokemon.
Number 8 is Herdier. If you've seen my top 5 worst middle evolution Pokemon list, you know that I'm not a fan of Herdier, or Stoutland for that matter. But Stoutland at least has a little bit of originality going on, and Lillipup overall is adorable. But unfortunately, they're not enough to save Herdier from the list. Unlike Herdier, Lillipup and Stoutland look different enough from the dogs they're based on. Herdier literally just looks like a regular dog. Just take a look at some of Herdier's in-game sprites. If you showed this to someone who wasn't familiar with the 5th generation of Pokemon, do you honestly think they'd be able to tell that this thing is a Pokemon, or just a drawing of a dog? The only thing going for Herdier that makes it a little less boring apart from its evolution line is its blue coat. But even then, the dog Herdier is based on, being the Yorkshire Terrier, has a similar coat as well. Pokemon has given us a lot of interesting looking Pokemon we want to have as a pet, but Herdier is easily one of, if not the most boring of the bunch.
Number 7. Voltorb and Electrode. Yeah, you knew these guys were going to be on the list. Voltorb is literally a red and white ball with eyes, and its evolved form is a white and red ball with eyes, and a mouth. So they're basically Pokeballs with eyes. What makes this evolution line even more lazy is that Voltorb doesn't even change into a different type of Pokeball upon evolution, like a Great Ball or an Ultra Ball. They literally just flip Voltorb upside down. How imaginative. Now for those of you who were surprised that these Pokemon were only number 7, at the very least, these Pokemon were based on something kind of original in the Pokemon universe. They're also known for exploding every now and then. And, funnily enough, the blue colour in the shiny form is possibly based on a Great Ball. That's something kind of interesting. But apart from that, Voltorb and Electrode as Pokemon are overall pretty damn boring.
Number 6 is Clink, a pair of gears with eyes. It evolves into Clang, a pair of gears with another gear attached, and that evolves into Klinklang, a pair of gears with another gear attached along with an extra gear and a ring. This evolution line, if you think about it, is kind of like a toy. You start out with one piece, you attach the next piece, and then you attach the last piece, and voila! Not only that, but their names are also some of the most unimaginative, especially for a 3-stage evolution. Clink, Clang, and Klinklang? If we take the Magnemite line for example, Magneton is just 3 Magnemites stuck together, but Magnezone ends up being a much more interesting and unique evolution rather than, say, just 5 Magnemites stuck together. I mean, a creature made up of gears could have come out looking really awesome. They could have started out as a pair of cogs, then end up forming some sort of giant mechanical machine. But instead, the Clink line takes the much simpler route and builds on each evolution one metal piece at a time. The end result isn't too bad, but the journey getting there and the choice of the names do leave a pretty boring impression.
Number 5. Goldeen and Seeking. Out of all the fish Pokemon, Hoops and I decided that overall, these were the most boring. Why? Well, the other fish Pokemon mentioned, we think have slightly more going for them when comparing them to the fish that they're based on. Both Goldeen and Seeking from their design and colour scheme look a bit too much like an actual fish, which would be fine if they had something interesting about it, and it seems that the only thing standing out for these two is their horn. But even then, as fish Pokemon, Goldeen and Seeking are kind of bland. Well, I guess that's what you get when you have a Pokemon that's based on a goldfish. They don't even stand out for being bad. I mean, Seeking isn't the worst battler, but looking at the other water types from Gen 1, Goldeen and Seeking to most people are definitely some of the blandest. I mean, did anyone choose Goldeen and Seeking over the other water types available in Gen 1? To be honest, I don't think I ever bothered catching a Goldeen in the original Red and Blue, or on Pokemon Go for that matter.
Number 4 is Seal. If we were judging Pokemon on how boring their names were, Seal would easily be the number 1 pick. Its name is exactly what it's based on with one letter changed. This would be the equivalent of calling Herdier Dog, or Goldeen Fish, or Ekans Snake. Which they technically did, they just decided to flip the name around. Design-wise, Seal doesn't look that much more interesting than an actual seal pup. I guess one of the only things going for it, like Goldeen and Seeking, is its horn. But Goldeen and Seeking at least have more thought out names, even if they are just a combination of Gold Queen and Sea King. But that's still 10 times more interesting than Seal. Dugong isn't much more interesting as an evolution, but at least looks a bit nicer and at least isn't called exactly what it's based on. Wait, Dugong is based on a dugong? You know what? Dugong can share the spot with Seal. I'm done. I'm done.
Number 3. Gromer Muck. Now we're getting to the part of the list where the remaining Pokemon, instead of having barely any interesting features, have pretty much no interesting features. These two Pokemon are of course based on living sludge, and just like the majority of Pokemon already talked about, it seems that not a lot of thought was put into these Pokemon as much as others, especially in their names. Gromer? That's not too bad. Muck? Muck. It's just Muck without the C. 10 out of 10 choice of name there, second only to Seal. Now having one Pokemon looking as simple as this for a sludge monster isn't that bad. I mean, if I saw Gromer for the first time and was told it had an evolution, I'd probably be intrigued by what they could come up with. Maybe the evolution is going to have some sort of radiation effect. Maybe it's going to grow legs. Maybe it'll have more colour. Or maybe when it evolves it pretty much looks the same. Like, if you really think about it, Gromer and Muck don't really look that different. And that's the main reason why these Pokemon are so high on the list. They have possibly the boringest looking evolution line. Like, I bet if one of these Pokemon were on one of those Who's That Pokemon, most people won't be able to tell the difference.
Hello viewers, and welcome to Who's That Pokemon. Now this episode is going to be very different from a regular episode, as instead of other YouTubers trying to figure out Pokemon from their silhouettes, this time it's you, the viewer's turn, just like in the actual show. The rules are simple. I'll be showing two silhouettes, and all you have to do is work out what exactly those are silhouettes of. You ready? Here we go. Okay, time's up. For the first silhouette, if you guessed Grimer, you're wrong. However, if you guessed Muck, you're also wrong. The first silhouette is actually Plasmus from the cartoon Teen Titans. And as for the second silhouette, if your guess was either Grimer or Muck, you're wrong again, because the second silhouette is literally just a piece of shit. What? I'd never said these were going to be silhouettes of Pokemon.
Number 2 is Sunflora. There have been so many interesting and uniquely designed Pokemon based on plant life. Sunflora is not one of them. If you were to imagine what a sunflower with a face would look like, Sunflora would be right on the money. Sunflora's pre-evolved form, Sunkern, is based on a shooting sunflower seed, but it actually is pretty nicely designed for a sunflower seed. Sunflora is exactly what you'd expect from a Pokemon based on a sunflower. A sunflower with a face. No fancy features added or differently colored anywhere. No special abilities or feature outside of its design. Even its name, Sunflora, a combination of sun and flora, meaning plant life. So it might as well have been called Sunflower. For a Pokemon classified as the Sun Pokemon, Sunflora is pretty dang disappointing, and easily one of the most boring Pokemon. But according to our list, maybe not quite the most boring.
And our pick for the number 1 most boring Pokemon is Crabby. It's just a crab. According to its origins, it's based on a crab. Its name is a pun on crab. Its Japanese name is literally crab. It looks just like a crab. It evolves into a bigger crab. That's it. It's just a crab. And that is our list for the 10 boringest Pokemon. In our opinion, of course. Because obviously some people are going to disagree with us. Just like every top 10 list. But hopefully you enjoyed our picks anyway. A massive thanks to Hoops for joining me today.
Thanks for having me. Alex and I actually did a video over on my channel on the top 5 most unique Pokemon, so if you like this video, I'm sure you'll love that video. So go ahead and click the link in the description to check it out. Thanks again for watching, and we will see you guys over on my channel.
Also, a thanks goes to Spectre for his cameo. If you want to see his actual Who's That Pokemon series, which is pretty entertaining, mainly because the game itself is extremely hard, they'll be in the description as well. Please leave a like if you enjoyed, and subscribe for more Pokemon videos in the future. And until next time, thanks so much for watching.